Hello, my name is Luisa Duran, and I am doing a presentation on my identity in my community. This is for an introduction to gentrification. Some of the things we'll be covering today are the objectives of my identity in my community, causes of gentrification, the effects of gentrification, potential solutions, and conclusion of the presentation. So some of the objectives and outcomes for this presentation include developing an understanding of what gentrification is and what causes gentrification, gathering information about these different organizations who combat gentrification and how you too can help, and how you can hear about these ideas to come up with a solution. We are also going to summarize the history of gentrification and reflect on the displacement within the communities. My identity in my community. So gentrification is prevalent in communities of low socioeconomic um, families. These students who are living in these communities are exploring gentrification firsthand, and it is impacting them in a big way in their communities because students aren't really aware of the implications that gentrification can have. But while they're experiencing these situations, they are noticing these changes happening before them, but they may not be completely aware of what it is that's actually happening or how it can impact their lives. Eventually, these families experience zoning issues with their Title I schools, and they're the main population that becomes impacted by this, and they may encounter displacement. So once these families are displaced in these Title I communities, they have to look elsewhere to find affordable housing. And sometimes it is very difficult to find affordable housing in the same community that they were once in and continue at the same school. So, as a teacher, I've had a front row seat to how gentrification in communities and schools impact these students and teachers as a whole. As a teacher, I've had to work from more than an hour away from campus and commute daily. And I was unable to live in the area primarily because the campus is surrounded, or the campus that I was teaching at, it was surrounded by housing that was provided to the students, immediate housing. After that immediate perimeter, everything outside of that, I made too much money, so I couldn't live there, but I didn't make enough money to live close to the campus. So I was forced to find affordable housing elsewhere, which was about an hour away. So even though the neighborhood was providing affordable housing for the immediate neighborhood, like just the perimeter of the school, I was still unable to live in the surrounding area. So this is one form of gentrification because the students that are living there, they experience their community as being limited to just the perimeter of the school. Everything outside of that is really what was being changed by developers in the area, and other people were coming into that community. Mostly the people that were coming into the community were of wealthier backgrounds. And so in these situations, students often come to school worried about being displaced or needing to move out at a moment's notice because they never know if a developer is going to take over their unit or take over their block. So when students are aware of these situations, often the older kids, they tend to act up in class, they withdraw from others, they choose not to participate, and more often than not, they become combative in their situation. So anything can set them off and they become reactive. And sometimes they do withdraw, but most of the time, it is an outward expression of their frustration and anger of not knowing what's going to happen on a day-to-day basis. And this is as a result of gentrification. So what are some causes of gentrification? Well, gentrification was first coined by Ruth Glass in the early 1960s, and it was to describe the housing issues that were happening in London. And according to Glass, there were three stages of gentrification. The first stage was when developers would come into the working class area and begin to buy up the areas to take advantage of whatever infrastructure was either their lease was expiring or maybe they couldn't afford it anymore. So those developers would buy those up. Then the community members would become displaced because those developers would kick those people out of the area or out of the place that they just bought up. So once that area is being transformed, the property values go up because the developers are making improvements to the area. So once this starts happening, most of the time the culture that's already there begins to disapparate. Like it's just completely gone from one day to the next because these developers are looking for people with money to come into the communities. So these families that are there, they become displaced quickly and have to relocate. And these families often include the students that belong to these Title I schools. And so they experience being moved frequently, and it causes a decline in their academics. These students are known to experience anxiety due to this whole process. So for families who are able to stay within the area, they experience both positive and negative consequences to gentrification. Sometimes the diversity within the community will begin to decline, and it will be erased pretty much from the gentrifiers that are living in the area, or they may experience where they're still in the same schools, but it's being populated by these gentrifiers who don't understand the culture and who will tease them or make fun of them, or not really take into consideration what their culture is, and use it inappropriately. So some of the effects of gentrification also include, once the infrastructures are being bought up by these developers, these families see less diversity in their own communities and their schools. And students who see less of their culture witness parts of them that are being represented in their communities disappear. So this affects their social and emotional well-being, and it ends up affecting their academic aspects of life. So these students who are greatly impacted are students who are from neighborhoods that are low socioeconomic. So they're mostly African American, they're mostly Latino, they're mostly of made up of cultures and um, communities where they're minorities. And so these people who have grown up in this area for generations have these developers that just come into their communities, take it over little by little or all at once, and their community becomes commercialized, or becomes what is considered to be whitewashed, and it makes the area more pleasing so that these wealthier families can come in and move into their communities. So when this happens, they see parts of themselves being removed from this place that they loved, this place that they've always grown up in. So, what are some potential solutions to gentrification? Well, to be honest, there's so many potential solutions that could come to mind, but gentrification doesn't seem that it's going to go away. It's not going to be dismantled anytime soon. So one possible solution could be to encourage these developers and these gentrifiers to assimilate with the culture that's already there instead of removing it. That is one way to help these students, because they will be able to connect with the new people that are moving into their communities if they're willing to assimilate to the culture that's already there. If they're not trying to get rid of them, the students will feel more at ease and more willing to work with these people and um, live in this community together, so where they can still continue to see themselves. Another possible solution is to provide an area for these families with affordable housing, and or consider rezoning these areas so that these families are able to stay within the area. And when we do that, these families and students are able to keep from being displaced. And this is similar to how back in the Hollywood days, when they first started filmmaking, Hollywood would purchase out units around their sets to have housing for their actors. So the same thing could be done for these families. Just like the school that I worked in, the housing around the area could be purchased and used only for the students and families in the area. Granted, teachers weren't able to necessarily live in that area, but I feel like as a teacher, I would much rather my students get to stay within their own communities than being displaced time after time after time, than it be reversed where I get to live there and they have to keep continuing to be displaced. I would much rather work with the community so that these students can improve their own living situations by and improve their academics by being able to stay within an affordable housing area. And organizations that work to help bridge these gaps to help connect the two are organizations like the Urban Displacement Project, the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and the National Low Income Housing Coalition. These are just a few organizations that work together to bring a light to gentrification and provide some possible solutions and work actually towards the cause. They are working to educate, they're working to improve, and they're putting in the work to make sure that these possible solutions are in the works of becoming actual solutions. So, in conclusion, gentrification can impact a community's identity. It can remove culture from the area, and it can be prevented. It cannot be prevented as a whole, but it can be improved. We can impact the neighborhood's identity by leaving the residents who do stay behind to feel as if they belong there without erasing them from the community that raised them. But it's also up to the gentrifiers who move into the community to keep that culture alive and allow these minorities to continue to see themselves within their communities instead of being unwelcome guests in homes and places that they grew up in their entire lives. It is up to the gentrifiers to be aware of these um, issues and to make sure that they're doing their part to not perpetuate them. Thank you so much for joining and listening to my presentation, and I hope that you have learned some information on gentrification and how we can help stop or at least some potential solutions that we have in order to combat gentrification.